Imagine being abandoned at birth, dropping out of college, sleeping on friends' floors because you couldn't afford rent, and collecting empty Coke bottles just to buy food. Most people would call that the beginning of a failed life. But for Steve Jobs, it was only the beginning of one of the greatest success stories in history. He would go on to build Apple, lose everything when he was fired from his own company, and then return to save it from collapse. This is the incredible true story of the man who proved that failure is never the end unless you decide to quit. Steve Jobs was born on February 24, 1955, in San Francisco, California. His biological parents were young university students who couldn't afford to raise a child, so they made the painful decision to put him up for adoption. Steve was adopted by Paul and Clara Jobs, a hardworking couple who raised him with love and taught him an important lesson. Whatever you build it with care and pride. That lesson stayed with Steve for the rest of his life. As a child, Steve became fascinated with machines. His father often repaired cars in the family garage, and Steve loved watching every step of the process. Instead of simply seeing broken parts, he wanted to understand how everything worked. By the time he became a teenager, that curiosity had turned into a passion for electronics. It was during these years that he met another young electronics genius named Steve Wozniak. Wozniak could design incredible machines, while Steve Jobs knew how to turn ideas into products people actually wanted. Together, they formed a partnership that would change the world. After finishing high school, Steve enrolled at Reed College, but he quickly realized he had no interest in spending thousands of dollars on classes that didn't inspire him. After just 6 months, he dropped out. It was one of the hardest decisions of his life. Without a degree, he had no clear future. He slept on friends' floors, returned empty Coke bottles for money, and walked miles every week just to get one free meal. But instead of wasting time, he attended classes that genuinely interested him. Looking back years later, Steve often said that every experience, even the ones that seemed meaningless, helped shape his future. During the 1970s, computers were huge, expensive machines that only governments and large companies could afford. Most people never imagined having one inside their homes. But Steve Jobs believed that one day every family would own a personal computer. When Steve Wozniak built a small computer as a hobby, Jobs immediately recognized its potential. Together they decided to start a business, even though they had almost no money. To raise enough cash, Steve sold his Volkswagen van, while Wozniak sold his scientific calculator. In 1976, they founded Apple Computer inside the garage of Steve's parents' house. There were no investors, no large office, and no guarantee of success. They simply believed in their idea more than anyone else did. Their first computer attracted attention from a local computer store owner who placed an order that they could barely afford to complete. Steve convinced suppliers to trust them and provide the parts on credit. It was a huge gamble, but it worked. They delivered every computer on time and earned their first real profit. That single opportunity proved Apple had a future. Soon they introduced the Apple II, a computer designed not just for engineers, but for ordinary people. It was easy to use, reliable, and unlike anything available at the time. Sales exploded. Families, schools, and businesses rushed to buy it, and Apple became one of the fastest-growing companies in America. By the age of 25, Steve Jobs had become a millionaire. But Steve wasn't interested in simply making money. He wanted to build products that people would love using every day. That vision led to the Macintosh, a computer that completely changed how people interacted with technology. Steve believed computers should be simple, beautiful, and accessible to everyone. From the outside, Steve Jobs looked unstoppable. He was young, rich, and celebrated as one of the greatest entrepreneurs of his generation. But behind closed doors, serious problems were developing. His demanding personality created constant conflicts with Apple's leadership. Arguments became more frequent, and the board of directors began questioning whether Steve was the right person to lead the company into the future. The young man who had built Apple from a small garage had no idea that his biggest challenge wasn't building the company, it was keeping it. In one of the most shocking moments in business history, Steve Jobs was about to lose everything he had worked so hard to create. In 1985, Steve Jobs was only 30 years old, but he had already achieved what most people spend a lifetime chasing. Apple had become one of the fastest-growing technology companies in the world, and Steve was recognized as one of the brightest young entrepreneurs in America. But behind the success, a power struggle was unfolding. The Apple board believed the company needed more experienced leadership, so they supported CEO John Sculley instead of Steve. In a decision that shocked the business world, the founder of Apple was forced out of the very company he had built. Overnight, Steve Jobs lost the company that had become his life's work. For a while, Steve felt completely defeated. He later admitted that being fired from Apple was the most painful experience of his life. The media believed his career was over, critics called him a failure, and many people assumed he would never recover. But instead of giving up, Steve chose to begin again. He believed that losing Apple had also given him something valuable, the freedom to start fresh. Just months later, he founded a new company called Next. Although its computers were expensive and never became a huge commercial success, the technology behind them was years ahead of its time. Around the same period, Steve made another risky decision. He bought a small computer graphics company from filmmaker George Lucas for $10 million. Most people thought it was a terrible investment because the company was losing money every year. That company was called Pixar. For several years, Pixar struggled to survive. Steve invested millions of dollars just to keep it alive because he believed its future was bigger than anyone else could see. Then, in 1995, everything changed with the release of Toy Story, the world's first fully computer-animated feature film. The movie became a massive success, earning hundreds of millions of dollars and changing the animation industry forever. Pixar became one of Hollywood's biggest studios, and Steve Jobs became a billionaire once again. Ironically, while Apple was struggling without him, Steve was proving that his success had never been an accident. Back at Apple, things were getting worse. The company had lost its direction, sales were falling, and bankruptcy seemed like a real possibility. Desperate for a solution, Apple decided to buy Next in 1996 because of its advanced software. That single decision brought Steve Jobs back to the company he had started more than a decade earlier. At first, Steve returned only as an advisor, but it quickly became clear that Apple needed his leadership. Within a year, he became CEO again. He immediately simplified the company's product lineup, canceled dozens of unsuccessful projects, and focused on creating fewer products with better quality. Many people questioned his decisions, but Steve believed that innovation comes from focus, not from doing everything at once. His strategy worked. Apple introduced the colorful iMac, which restored public confidence in the company. A few years later came the iPod, allowing people to carry thousands of songs in their pockets. Then, in 2007, Steve Jobs stepped onto a stage and introduced a device that would change the world forever: the iPhone. It wasn't just another mobile phone. It combined communication, music, and the internet into one elegant touchscreen device. The iPhone completely transformed the smartphone industry and changed the way billions of people live, work, and communicate. Under Steve Jobs' leadership, Apple went from being a company close to bankruptcy to becoming one of the most valuable businesses in history. The young man who once slept on friends' floors and struggled to buy food had built products that changed the lives of people all over the world. But while Apple was reaching new heights, Steve was facing his greatest personal battle. In 2003, he was diagnosed with a rare form of pancreatic cancer. Even during treatment, he continued working because he believed there was still so much left to create. On October 5, 2011, Steve Jobs passed away at the age of 56. The news saddened millions of people around the world, but his ideas, products, and vision continue to inspire generations of entrepreneurs. Steve Jobs' story isn't just about technology or money. It's about believing in your vision when no one else does. It's about starting with almost nothing, losing everything, and still finding the courage to begin again. He proved that failure is not the opposite of success. It's often the path that leads to it. The next time you hold an iPhone, open a MacBook, or dream about building something meaningful, remember this story. Remember the young man who started in a small garage with nothing but an impossible dream. Because every great success begins with one person who refuses to give up, no matter how many times life tells them to quit. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this true story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications for more inspiring stories of real people who change the world.